So the New Horizons spacecraft gave us our first up-close view of Pluto. The idea would be that we have a spacecraft visit Pluto, but it's kind of an expensive operation to send a spacecraft to visit one world, even something as important as Pluto. You remember other spacecraft that have visited other worlds, for example, some of the ones that went to Jupiter, like the Galileo spacecraft, flew by a couple of asteroids along the way. So the spacecraft was not designed to go into orbit around Pluto. It was designed to get to Pluto in a reasonable length of time. In order to go into orbit around Pluto, it would have had to be going a much different speed to match speeds with Pluto, and that probably would have taken several decades to arrive at Pluto. So it's just going to go shooting past Pluto. And the thought was, well, if it shoots past Pluto, then what else is out there it might visit? So as the New Horizons spacecraft was shooting outwards, it passed by Pluto. So it passed by Pluto, and its orbit just kept it going. And so they started searching for what else is out there that possibly it could visit. And so the Hubble telescope and other telescopes were scanning the sky, looking for a Kuiper Belt object that was going to be somewhere along the orbit of the New Horizons spacecraft as it was going further and further from the sun. And at first, there wasn't anything that was known. And then finally, they discovered a Kuiper Belt object that was in the general area that it was heading. And so it was called 2014 MU69. As they were approaching it, they eventually, they temporarily started nicknaming it Ultima Thule. Ultima Thule being from mythology. And so this object here, Kuiper Belt object that was out there, and was a flyby occurred really not that long ago, January of 2019. And so it gave us our first up-close view of the object. Ultima Thule was just the nickname that was given by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to the object. This was not an approved name. Many of these objects, when they first discovered, get kind of a nickname by the people who found them. The IAU Commission on Names actually approves the name, and they did not approve Ultima Thule. What they expected was to see something that looked somewhat potato-shaped, which is the typical shape of these things. After discovery, they kept monitoring this thing to find out more and more about it, so they have some idea what to program the New Horizons spacecraft to look for. Because remember, it's coming in here, and as it goes by, it's only in the vicinity for a very short period of time. You got to program weeks into advance at the minimum what it's going to look at and where it's going to look. Well, as they were observing 2014 MU69, it passed directly in front of a star. And so different observers at different locations of the Earth monitored the path of this, and they saw when the stars appeared to disappear. In some cases, the stars did not disappear at all, and that meant it was beyond the edge of it. In other cases, they disappeared and then reappeared, and they gave an idea of the size of it. Well, the problem was the appearing and disappearing didn't seem to make sense. It was almost like this was two lobes. And so they decided it could be a double lobe thing, or possibly a contact binary, or possibly even a binary sort of object orbiting each other very close. So artist's impression of what they expected it to look like was that. What they actually found was that, which was not terribly far off. And so when they first looked at it, they said, well, it does look like it was two objects that drifted together. Okay, What a little bit surprising was it had troughs and hills and different parts of the surface. Different parts of the surface kind of looked like they were made of different stuff. Big indentation right here. The contact point in here drifted together, like maybe melted when it hit or something and cemented itself together. Almost no craters at all on it. Okay, so that was a surprise because almost everything else we saw in the solar system had craters. It was definitely red, and so that was expected from organic molecules. So what do we get out of this? Okay, to give a comparison, the Rosetta spacecraft that visited the comet 67P. That's the size of that comet right there. So it gives you an idea of the sort of size of this thing, much, much bigger than a comet. Well, if it's been in the Kuiper Belt all these years, that kind of makes sense. Most of the comets that we see have actually dived in closer to the sun, and so they've been sublimating and boiling stuff off into space. So they're going to be smaller. Secondly, the smaller objects are easier to displace and toss around than the big objects. And so again, the bigger ones would be more likely to stay put. And it was visible from Earth, even if it was barely visible from Earth. And so that would again suggest it had to be a pretty big object. Probably something the size of that small comet would not be visible that far out. Different parts of the surface do in fact appear to be different compositions, almost as if this is a composite object. So it was possibly constructed of a whole bunch of small things coming together. Well, that's actually kind of makes sense if you think about the Kuiper Belt and the Proplet and how these things happen. So this might actually be even better than Pluto in terms of what a raw object would look like left over from the Proplet. First steps in making things. Now, there's several things here that were a little bit confusing. Okay, one of them is the very sparse nature of the craters. Does that mean that in fact Kuiper Belt objects don't get hit very often because the space is so empty out there? Or does it mean that this object has undergone some resurfacing and something that has changed the surface? And they don't really know the difference between those. They don't really know which of those ideas is correct. They're still working on that. There were several, in fact, more than several, a whole bunch of little small pits on the surface. They don't understand where they come from, completely unknown. One possibility is that solar heating caused outgassing or material to sublimate and make gas that blew out through those holes. So that's one possibility, kind of like the way comets do with the jets. Ultima Thule was not the name that stuck. So the IU Commission on Names decided to call it Arrokoth. And so it was given a number. So number 486,958, Arrokoth. Arrokoth being Native American language for sky. And so the Pawnee, I think it was. And so that was the name that was given to it. Here we see a picture of it as after New Horizons already passed. That's looking back at it, and you can see it passing by. Most of the other side of it being lit by the sun. The general idea that people had was it was two round objects pulled together. Careful analysis afterwards indicates, well, maybe one of these objects was seen there, but it's more of a pancake shape if you see it on the side. We saw it, looking like that, like a big round object, but it may have been more pancake shaped. That's not entirely clear how something like that would even form. So they don't really understand this object. Our best guess is that this thing formed from a whole bunch of small objects that came together, and it became two other objects that spiraled in close together and made contact with each other. That's our best guess is where this thing came from. Now, is this normal for Kuiper Belt objects, or is this an unusual one? We don't know. We haven't seen any others. New Horizons is continuing to go through the Kuiper Belt. It's not expected to come this close to anything else out there. And we cannot shift the orbit very much to come near anything that we know. They are looking still in the part of the belt where it's heading to see if you see anything else out there, in which case it might be able to have an orbit shift to go by something else, but we don't really know of anything like that. So this might be the only close one. There will be a few others that it will have very distant views of, but I don't know we'll see anything quite this well. So we may not be able to answer the questions about the Kuiper Belt from this one spacecraft.